Thanks very much, Cathaoirleach. Thanks, Minister. I do understand I suppose, all the complexities and difficulties over history when you look at some of the really ridiculous suggestions in some of the bills that were proposed a number of years ago. I do understand that, today we have moved on, and I will say, in fairness to yourself, Minister, at least you're a minister that has delivered this legislation, unlike others before you that talked a lot of talk. And I really would love to be able to welcome it without any reservations, but unfortunately I do have serious reservations, and I think that while today and other days when this was being discussed or talked about should be, they should be landmark days, it should be finally we're moving forward, I do feel that there's serious potential for very serious mistakes to be made. Particularly around the mandatory information session. I don't believe that has been removed. I know maybe the requirement for it to be in person with a social worker has changed, but there's still an information session, and it still explicitly states in the legislation what part of the reason for this is to explain to the relevant person, the importance of the privacy rights of the parent. Now, it was something that came up at, I would say, nearly every single one of our pre-leg sessions, and I acknowledge Deputy Batchik and actually Deputy Murnane O'Connor here as well from the committee. And I really feel like the committee, worked so well together. And we all know in this House that there's times where things can get fraught with committees, but there was genuine will on everybody's part, government reps and opposition reps. And we had 83 recommendations, and I know that you reference a number of things in your speech in relation to what came up with PLS and changes, but the really big things, the stuff around the mandatory information session, we gave a suggestion in that report of looking at alternatives, and one would potentially be the registered post option. I don't understand why that can't be looked at, and we will be putting amendments forward to that effect from Sinn Féin when it comes to amendment stage in the committee. I think there's grey areas over the medical history, and I acknowledge what you're saying, and I'm glad to get that clarity around an adopted person. However, what I fear is somebody who, obviously, if you don't know very much at all about your life, that you just know that you were adopted, people will say they're looking for their medical history, their family medical history. And that, I think, creates grey areas, whether there's a medical practitioner involved or not. Because obviously, if it's a family medical history, there's the chance it's going to have a genetic relative, as you describe in your speech. So does that mean then they're in a different process? The wording of relevant data is not all the data relevant to them if it's about them and their personal life. If you compare it to, let's say myself, I'm not adopted, I can get all that information. Why are we having a different set of rules for people who are adopted, and then in the same breath say we're trying to end the discrimination that they've faced for years? So these are the issues that I think, and I genuinely think, I'm not saying it to be critical for critical sake, I would love nothing more, as well as chair of the committee, to think that this was going to pass through committee without any amendments. Because we have done a huge amount of work on this and other areas in mother and baby homes in the committee. But that's why I feel I do need to raise these issues, and on behalf of people who have contacted us. The new agency as well, I really feel it was a missed opportunity not to develop a new agency. And we would have acknowledged that that wouldn't happen overnight. You have to give those a development of a new agency time, and you don't want to delay time. A lot of people in relation to this issue don't have time. So we recommended oversight of TUSLA and the Adoption Authority of Ireland in the meantime, like an ombudsman type body for appeals. And I don't see that has been taken on board. And I think given that redress is going to be the next thing we'll be talking about in a few months in this chamber, I do think a new agency would have been appropriate. And it could have actually been a time managed one. It isn't something that potentially needs to be in existence forever. Part 4 as well, and I'm actually just looking for clarity on this if I understand it right, where there's a hierarchy like mother, father. If there's a situation, and you can come back to me on this if you wish, where somebody has died in care and maybe the parent does not want to get that information, but a sibling does, are they entitled to get that, or do their own parents have to have passed away? That is actually one I'm genuinely looking for clarity on. I actually didn't look, there's 20 minutes, so I have a few more minutes left. What else? Oh yeah, in relation to the part here where you say that you've taken on board, or it will be taken on board in the guidelines that are being produced regarding the release of medical data, I just don't see why that couldn't have been done in the legislation. And, you know, I don't want to be cynical, but it's easy to say you're going to take it on board in the guidelines when it's not actually written in the legislation. And I do feel strongly that, you know, huge work went into that by all of us, by every single person on that committee. And I do feel that there was very many missed opportunities, particularly around the mandatory information session, the new agency. And if we can get more clarity, and I would welcome maybe a briefing from the department officials in relation particularly to the medical information, because I do fear, and if I'm understanding it incorrectly, that's fine, and I hope I actually am, because it would be welcome for people if that was the case. But I do fear that there's going to be grey areas created there for people, whether or not they're entitled to the data. Is it relevant? Is it relevant to them? Because people who obviously don't know much about their own lives are not going to know exactly what information they're looking for. Is that going to be considered too general? So I will leave it at that for now, Count Carla.
Thank you, Deputy Funchion.